good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is John here. I am here once again from HC3. I'm joined here with my guest, Dr. David Krause, and today this is an episode none of you want to miss. This is something that's really touches our heart, is very important to both David and I, because we're veterans. And because we're veterans, we have a deep connection with the veteran community. And the veteran community is often forgotten when it comes to Legionnaires disease. And that's what we're going to jump into today. And we're going to go right into the connections with Legionnaires disease, what it actually means for us, and the implications to our elderly veterans, and even some of our serving veterans as well. David, welcome back to another discussion. How are you, my friend?
I'm well. Thanks for having me here today.
So this is really important. This is a topic, David, that you and I we've discussed many times, and as veterans ourselves, it kind of touches our hearts, and it makes us a bit sad as well when we see veterans succumb to Legionnaires. And so let's talk a little bit about the history of Legionnaires disease, where it came from, and why it's so connected to our veteran community.
Absolutely. Yeah, Legionnaires disease, which was actually named after the name was coined after the veterans, or the veterans of foreign wars, and the Legionnaires organization in 1976, where this was the first time this outbreak of disease had been, I'll say, truly investigated, and efforts were taken to understand its cause, and track it down, really run it down to ground, because essentially in 1976 there was an outbreak that affected a bunch of people who had attended a conference, convention in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at the Bellevue Stratford Hotel, which had housed the Veteran of Foreign Wars convention that year. Ironically, when I've talked with policymakers, governors, and senators, and bringing this subject up, often the answer is Legionnaires' disease. Wasn't that cured in 1976? No, it was discovered in 1976. That's when we figured out what was going on. But there's a lot of disconnect between the reality and what policymakers know about it.
But David, how did the event actually highlight the vulnerabilities to our veterans? Because obviously this was this outbreak. We knew nothing about it till then. 1976 happens, and how did this highlight? I mean, we've named it Legionnaires' disease, but how did it highlight the vulnerabilities that veterans have?
Well, I tell you, it was kind of crazy. If you look back at the history of this, the news reports, even the CDC has a pretty impressive little display on this, on the investigations that happened when this outbreak of disease happened. It was pneumonias, and I think dozens of people were made ill. I think over 100 people were made ill. Dozens were succumbed to the disease and died. And at the time, in the height of the Cold War, the question was this was this a bioterrorism attack? Was this chemical exposures? Was this some type of heavy metal or nickel in the aerosol being spread around the downtown Philly area? There was great concern. It made the front page of Time and Time magazine and Newsweek, and frankly, at that point in time, if you can imagine, we're not that far away from World War II, and the veterans had, I'll say, a much greater status in American society, and so a perceived attack upon veterans, our fathers and our grandfathers, who were being, who were there celebrating and convening to talk about veterans affairs, really caught people's attention, and a lot of anger. And the fact that public health officials, certainly in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, were befuddled and didn't understand what was going on. And then beyond that was the bring in the CDC to try to figure out what was happening. And this took many months to happen. They couldn't culture what organism was causing these people to become ill and die.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was a big investigative effort that finally, yielded fruit.
No, David, why? So, I mean, we've talked about this before. Let's talk a little bit about how the transmission, the path of transmission, because then we can talk about why it really affects our veterans as well. Just remind everybody the path of transmission for this when they found out what this disease was and the organism. Let's talk a little bit how they actually found that information and what kind of path it takes.
Well, it is the strangest microbe we've seen, in many ways back at the time. This turns out to be a waterborne pathogen. So it's a bacteria that grows and lives in water. It doesn't live for very long outside of water, but we're exposed to it by breathing, by inhaling small droplets of water with the viable virulent pathogens in them. It's a gram-negative bacteria. It's an aerobic bacteria. And so what I always thought was the strangest part is it's an organism that grows in an environment where there isn't a whole lot of oxygen, but it becomes virulent and pathogenic and deadly when it grows in the most oxygenated part of our lungs, our body, the lungs. So that's one aspect. The other part is it doesn't grow on other nutrient agar and tests that are usually used in the laboratory. So, you grow water samples out onto a agar plate in the laboratory, and everything else grows faster, and the conditions aren't right. So it simply wasn't seen because it didn't grow on the food and the conditions that we normally put bacteria on. So the investigators from CDC really had to do some sleuthing to figure out what was there that was caused, that was growing in the people's lungs, and that they find a new way to grow it and enumerate it, and really discovered an entire new family of bacteria that was really having a big time in our drinking water pipes and our cooling towers and all types of exposures that we understand much better now at this point.
But why do you think, David? I mean, obviously, this is not. It doesn't pick who it infects. It's not that intelligent yet. It doesn't pick anything. But why do you think our veterans are more at risk? Now, I know everybody's at risk, but why is it that veterans are more at risk, and it's especially in this modern day as well?
Right. So susceptibility is one big part of it. So as you age, your respiratory system and your ability to fight off organisms becomes more compromised. Smokers, former smokers, all of those are risk factors. And I used to think it was interesting. Anybody who's of advanced age, over 50. Well, that's a lot of folks now. And now that I'm there, I'm asking, is that really advanced age?
I'm beginning to feel my age, David.
That's right.
Not go there.
so anybody with a compromised immune system, COPD, diabetes, many risk factors, asthma, things like that can make your body less able to handle bacterial infections. Really increases your susceptibility. But we got to remember, when you have an outbreak, clearly 40 to 45% of the people who are made ill or contract the disease don't have any pre-existing conditions. So, it's true that you're more susceptible.
Yeah,
you're still susceptible if you're not hitting one of those pre-existing conditions. What is interesting, though, is that children are exceedingly rarely ever detected to be affected by Legionnaires' disease. That tremendous research should really be going into that as to why do they seem to be so, unlikely to be diagnosed or impacted by Legionella.
Do you think that should be future research that we're doing that should be done now, because there seems to be a lack of empirical research on that side of things, and that's absolutely fascinating. That fascinates me, the fact that our veteran community can be affected, as in could anyone of advanced age but our children seem to be totally protected from it.
Well, I wouldn't go totally protected, but they really don't catch this. I've seen maybe 2 or 3 cases of teenagers, and there's been a handful of cases where children have aspirated water that was contaminated. Out of thousands, tens of thousands of cases that have been reported. So it's fairly unheard of, and something is amiss when you do see that. But part of it may be just is not the age of the person, it may be the age of their alveolar macrophages. So
Right.
that those little amoeba-like organisms that are cells that are in our lungs that really go around and gobble up bacteria and soot and other pollutants. Maybe it's the aging of them and the impact that they have, because that's where really the susceptibility is. When those aren't doing their job right, when they're overwhelmed by the bacteria, then the disease ensues. So a tremendous research needs to happen there. But that's been one of my arguments for a long time. The way Legionnaire's disease was, it came onto the scene, the way it was diagnosed and talked about, it was a top-down decision. The need to make it a nationally notifiable disease was Johnny on the spot. And there are many similar organisms, similar diseases that are also waterborne pathogens that cause more death, that cause more damage, that cause more disease, that cost more in healthcare dollars in America, that are not even notifiable. They're not being tracked on a national basis. And I think, it makes it, so we have a lot of information on Legionnaire's disease and are able to have surveillance on that. But these other organisms, Pseudomonas and NTMs, non-tuberculous mycobacteria, are just as dangerous, if not more so, and we have less visibility on them. So I kind of call them the usual suspects, or the three bad actors.
Yeah.
They all grow in the same organism, same environment. They have similar types of disease. They're very often slow growers. And where you find one, you may find the others as well.
How do you, obviously, because our veteran community are at risk from all of these, and there's probably a lot more, as you say, there's probably a lot more examples out there of NTM, Pseudomonas causing more widespread illnesses and death, perhaps even through that. Why do you think why is it not getting reported? Why do you think that Legionnaires has taken more precedence over these other ones that seem to be more prevalent and more dangerous?
By accident of fate. Just as it was not an organism that was being sought after and looked at as a pathogen. The outbreak happened and the CDC investigators found it. And then there was a directive that it be monitored and tracked and then reported nationally. The other organisms didn't have that fate. It turns out Legionnaire's disease has been causing outbreaks for long before we ever discovered it in 1976, and at the same hotel 2 years before.
Wow.
At a different conference, there was a similar outbreak, but it didn't raise the same level of recognition, because it wasn't the veterans of foreign wars. It wasn't the Legionnaires who were made sick. It was, it sounds strange, it was the Order of Oddfellows. So, but for
they
a
weren't
name,
thought of well enough.
we could be talking about having Oddfellows disease right now instead of Legionnaires.
Oh my God, can you imagine that? What a name! I think Legionnaires, it fits it as well. And do you think that's the reason that it became more notable, because it was veterans and it was military oriented?
There's a lot in a name. There is some gravitas to that, and you wonder how important that has been. But yeah, I think that it impacted veterans, and continues to affect veterans even today at a higher rate, because of the aging and the impacts that we experience in training and in combat and deployments.
Absolutely.
the injuries that people have are not always visible on the skin. Diseases and impacts on our health that can be long lasting, such as from the burn pits, from exposure to defoliant agents,
I mean, there was a lot of
radioactives, and other
respiratory
chemical agents. Yeah,
problems,
there's a lot
was
of
there,
stuff we're
with
exposed to.
veterans from when they came back from Vietnam, and incredible, and so that makes them even more susceptible.
And there's going to be more and more of those aging veterans after 20 years of war. And I don't care how tough you are and how
Yeah,
strong you are,
yeah,
how many miles you can road march, when you can't breathe, when you have an organism that is
yeah.
causing you to become deadly ill.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's not a good
It's
thing.
heartbreaking. I see a lot of veterans when I'm out and about and doing things, and I sometimes see veterans holding their oxygen tanks and things like that, and it kind of breaks my heart because I think for what they gave, and literally, it's not the war that's taken them. It's this bacteria. It's something else that has invaded their system that has caused them this, and it's really it, it's it's heartbreaking to see.
And it's
David,
preventable.
how widespread do you think this is? And I'm not just talking, obviously,
Well,
in the US, but how widespread is this? And is it getting worse?
it is getting worse. But I'll tell you, Legionnaires disease, Legionella, these biofilm and waterborne pathogens, it's a first world problem. I mean, these are first world problems, as we often joke about. It's not this is not the disease you die from in
No.
Central America or in in a town that has no running water. This is a problem that occurs with indoor plumbing, with heated water, with hot showers. This is a problem that happens with air conditioning because of the cooling towers, not the air conditioning systems inside the buildings, but the cooling towers,
Yeah.
the cooling equipment, the cooling towers that are used for data centers. All that AI and all
I know.
these web services and servers, they use a ton of water. They are really on the threshold of having issues on a regular basis because of organisms that grow in this water. And when these data centers are close to populated areas, which is where
Yeah.
you want them, they can be a threat there. But all of the things that we enjoy, hot tubs and resorts and high-rise buildings, this is where this organism has found a home and is often left to its own devices and can spread. Cruise ships and all types of things that we enjoy. This is not something we're experiencing in the bush or out in the field.
No.
Frankly, Legionella kind of gets its rear end kicked by other organisms in the wild. But when we kill off all those other organisms
Yeah.
and give it a place to live where it is just an ideal state, it can really become dangerous.
Just jumping back to our veterans, you're talking about obviously these cooling towers, and perhaps even as a secondary aspect the HVAC units, because obviously it's coming from the cooling towers and things like that. There must be a really increased danger of exposure in some of the VA hospitals and the VA clinics because lack of management or taking it seriously. Let's talk about some outbreaks, even from uh, water fountains and et cetera, et cetera. Let's talk about some of the outbreaks and why our VA centers are especially at risk.
Well, as far back as 2021, I think it was, the VA recognized from outbreaks back in the 2015, 2016 period at the Quincy Veterans Retirement Center and other VA hospitals in Pittsburgh that, when building water systems are not, I'll say, maintained to a certain level. When we say are poorly maintained, hell, they're all poorly maintained.
I was going to
Nobody
say, just
maintains a
call it a
water system.
spade.
You turn on the faucet, you got good water. That's what we've been told.
Yeah.
The water is clean and pure. Well, maybe clean and pure leaving the water plant, but it goes through miles of pipe. And if you ever watch them install new water lines, they're full of dirt, they're full of debris,
Yeah.
and in that are the bacteria that are introduced. So, and that's all after the treatment. You're not adjusting it from there. But older facilities are at risk. New facilities are at risk. Older plumbing systems and what we call distribution lines in a city. It kind of correlates with what we see. There's more cases of Legionnaire's disease, more outbreaks in older states and older cities that have older plumbing systems. And so where you have that debris, that combination, it's important to recognize that a degraded infrastructure system, whether it's in a building specifically or degraded infrastructure in a community, that is not used, that is not repaired, that is not kept up to date, can result in these waterborne pathogens such as Legionella working into a building and becoming virulent and causing disease.
It also seems like to me, David, as well, that, and we've talked about this before as well, but within HC, everybody's talked about this within our organisation, but there seems to be a lack of awareness when it comes to the water management plans, and in particular within VA hospitals and clinics, and even in other centres, that it's almost there's no proactivity to it. They're not being proactive. It's always based on, let's not bother about it until someone dies.
Well, it wasn't required. It's still not required in most facilities. When you get to healthcare as of 2017, it was all of a sudden immediately required. Yet CMS really set the organizations up for failure. They didn't tell them what it was. What does a good water management plan and program look like? What does it involve? And they specifically told them, you don't have to test. That is nonsense. You don't have to sample and determine if the organism that you're trying to control is being controlled or is present or is growing. Because we can assume that if I pull this lever or add this chemical or raise this temperature, it's going to work. Guess what? It doesn't. It doesn't very many times it does not achieve the consequences and conditions that we expect it to. So, it really needs to be a factor of maintenance, surveillance, and monitoring. And that monitoring is not measuring of chemicals or surrogates. It's measuring for the organism we're looking for. And that involves testing. And hospitals and nursing homes and at-risk facilities are scared to death of testing. And there seems to be this craziness. And this is one thing that has really bugged me. CDC makes this statement that there is no concentration that has been deemed to be safe for Legionella. That just puts people on edge. So you mean anytime I detect it, it's not safe? No, that's not what it means, but that's how people have taken it. And they've still left that out there. They say that about lead as well, that there's no concentration that's been determined to be safe. Well, that's true, but there's some concentrations we know that are either an issue and a problem and concern. So we've got messaging from the public health level really needs to improve.
Do you think then in public health, that's why they, in a lot of these facilities, they kind of stick their head in the sand and don't want to deal with it because there's ignorance. They don't know which levels are safe and which are not. And so they just think, I won't bother with it and I'll wait until something happens.
Yeah. And until something happens, and I've got to do it, because when they see the potential impact and the cost of doing this, especially if they've had an outbreak or a case, and it can become hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of unbudgeted funds that have to do this emergency process. There's no clear path. There's no SOP on how you do this and what you do and how you respond if you have a certain concentration or a certain level. So there's so much uncertainty that it inhibits people's willingness and ability to move forward. And that needs to be fixed. That needs to be changed. So that's one of my pet peeves is really that we've told people you have to do this water management plans.
Yeah.
But didn't bother to tell them how to do it. Didn't bother to say who's qualified to do it. What training, knowledge, skills, abilities do you need in order to do this properly? And guess what? Has this ever been shown to actually prevent and fix problems? So, that's a big question of the process. I was, in the service, one of the things we used to say is, we don't want to do a ready, fire, aim.
No.
Pull that trigger and watch that round go down range and hope for the best. And that's a lot of what's happened, unfortunately, with Legionnaires and public policy.
I want to jump back to something you talked about reporting, because I want to go into the reporting side of it, because I guess that's another pet peeve of yours as well, because the reporting is a big weakness. We've talked about this before. And obviously there's been cases, in VA hospitals and clinics and various other things. But do you think there's a mix-up? Do you think there's we don't have enough data on the VA hospitals and clinics that maybe be attributed to something else, like, well, that wasn't Legionnaires, that could have been their old age, it might have just been the flu, so to speak, so they don't report it, it's not measured? Do you think that must be another thing that bugs you?
To report it, you first have to diagnose it.
Exactly.
Diagnosing is a specific test. It's now it's one of 3 tests, but it's essentially been either you take a culture of the sputum, which is not a comfortable thing to do, and you grow it out, and you hope the people who are growing it out know what they're doing. Or you do a specific urine antigen test, which is, again, you suspect the disease, you have this one test done, and it says yes or no. Or there's a PCR test, polymerase chain reaction, which can detect the DNA of the organism inside the person's body, blood or fluids or something of that nature. So you have to do that. We know from a handful of studies that we're probably only diagnosing 10 to 20% of the actual number of cases that are out there. So in any given year, say 2018, there's 10,000 cases of Legionnaire's disease, confirmed cases reported to the CDC. 4%. 4% of those are part of an outbreak. Only cases that are events of an outbreak, which is 2 or more cases associated with a facility, 2 or more cases are investigated as far as an environmental or source investigation. Sometimes in healthcare, they'll deem it to be a healthcare investigation and prompt that, but they don't report what those numbers are necessarily. So we are truly, when we see, there's 10,000 cases, 5,000 cases, 6,000 cases, whatever it is per year since 2013, we are truly looking at the tip of the iceberg. The vast majority, 95% plus of the actual number of cases that we know about are below the waterline. And actually, it's probably, tenfold greater than that. The best numbers I've seen from the National Academies of Science report in 2019 indicated that they suspect it's between 52 and 70,000 cases per year in the United States.
Wow. That's in the USA alone.
Yeah, exactly. Europe, in the United States, not just in the United States, but Canada, Europe, they have quite a few, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Southeast Asia.
It's interesting. I would venture, Dave, that let's go back to World War II, right? And I remember as a young soldier, especially as a combat medic, being told that more people died through disease and even in trench foot in World War I, but through disease in wars than actually what a bullet had taken them. And whilst that might seem ridiculous to some people, it pretty there's a lot of truth to it. So I would probably venture an opinion that perhaps a lot of people died through Legionella and we didn't even know.
Well, prior to World War II, we really didn't have antibiotics, so a disease was a death knell. You penetrate your foot with a spike or something like that, an infection was almost foregone, and that's why during World War I and as well as the U.S. Civil War, a lot of amputations happened. Now we're able to, we've been in this, I'll say, this period of antibiotic honeymoon. The problem is the antibiotics that we're using, they become less and less effective over time, and we need to develop more and better antibiotics that don't actually, cause more damage than they help.
Yeah.
But one of the things we have to consider is the same genes in many of the organisms, including Legionella, that makes it tolerant to chlorine, also makes it antibiotic resistant. So our efforts to control it in our plumbing and our water systems by using chlorine may also be driving its resilience and resistance to antibiotics. And if if Legionella becomes resistant or untreatable by antibiotics, we're in a mill of a hess.
That's great. Correct me if I'm wrong, David, because we're talking about obviously veterans and old elderly people and through the history of it and things, but I seem to remember that there was an outbreak in modern day in military units, and I can't remember where it was, but there was an outbreak of Legionnaires in a military unit in our modern military buildings, and that seems to be something that should be looked at. And I don't know what.
I think those were associated with some of the hospitals around DC. So they
Right.
may have
Okay.
been some of the units that were where they were housing soldiers who were in transit or were
Right.
having medical care because of wounds. But that's I believe those were some of the outbreaks and cases. But we've had outbreaks at the State Fair in Asheville. We've had outbreaks
Oh
at the
God, yeah. I
Sheraton in
remember.
Atlanta. You know, because of the wonders of modern medicine, people are walking around with immune systems uh, and able to survive cancer, undergo cancer treatment, and live a otherwise fairly normal life. But when they're walking around, they are so susceptible to infections such as Legionnaire's disease that you look across a population of people. If you did a poll, you'd find out that people that you had no idea or wouldn't otherwise consider to be at risk, a lot of them may be at severe risk if they're encountering this organism.
Going back to the Asheville outbreak, obviously, I mean, it's kind of jumping away from the veteran side of things here, but there'd be a lot of veterans would go to that state fair, and it just showed you. I think that's a great example of how dangerous that was, and how that affected so many people from a fountain.
Yeah. I mean that one affected. That was the largest outbreak since the original one in Philadelphia. It was well over 120 people.
Right.
Then you had the New York City outbreak in 2015. Another factor that I don't think has really and I don't care if people whether people use cannabis or not, but there is medical evidence that exposure to THC, the psychoactive ingredient in cannabis, is able to interfere with the alveolar macrophages in the lungs and has resulted in otherwise young, healthy guys who with otherwise you would never expect them to see contracting Legionnaire's disease to get ill. And
Wow.
so, with the, I'll say, normalization of medical marijuana and the use and the legalization of marijuana in many states and areas of the country, you've got to wonder how that is playing into the increased number of cases and the increased number of people contracting this. And it's not that you have to smoke it. Any exposure to THC through edibles or dermal ingredients or anything like that can interfere with the AM's, the alveolar macrophages ability. And I can tell you right now, currently, CDC and public health officials do not ask. They do not inquire. They do not seek. They do not understand. They do not even talk about that as a risk factor. But it is.
Do you know that's fascinating, Dave? Because you know what? Everywhere. Look, I've had the gummies, but I've taken. I don't smoke anything. I don't smoke anything at all. But I've had the gummies and I've had the drops. Now, wherever I have managed to get not marijuana but CBD, for instance, right? There's always a veteran program in a lot of these CBD organizations and these CBD stores. They say, okay, this is great for veterans. So I wonder if that connection that you're talking about also is increasing to the susceptibility and the potential cases to our veterans that are actually taking this to help them with their PTSD, to help them with their anxiety, their dreams,
Or
whatever it
chronic
is,
pain. Yeah,
in their
I
pain.
know. That needs to be researched. That absolutely needs to be researched. And we're all grown boys here. We can take our risks as we see fit, but if they're not acknowledging and investigating and understanding this risk, then you are not informed. We can't be fully informed as to the entirety of the risks and how those risks can be minimized in order to reduce the chance of contracting this disease, which can be debilitating. I mean, if a person contracts Legionnaire's disease outside of a hospital, outside of a rehab or medical facility, they have a 10% chance of dying. That's 1 in 10.
That's nuts.
That is a huge fatality rate.
That's a huge number.
If you don't die, you're almost, 80 to 90% of people are hospitalized. Most of those are in an ICU. You're often intubated. I'm dealing with legal cases in which, people have been on you've been in an ICU or in a ventilator for months, and just being on a ventilator for months on end, that can wreck your body in and of itself.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's what's happened. I mean, changing the subject a little bit, but I think that's kind of what happened as well with COVID-19. And I can see some relationship between COVID and also Legionnaire's disease. And who knows that many people who passed with COVID or had the issues with COVID, actually maybe it was attributed to Legionnaires.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, there was, during all that period, it was the question of how is Legionella involved in this and other pathogens. There were a handful of cases I'm aware of where people were diagnosed with both at the same time. Now that's some really bad luck. But yeah, it has the very same presentation. Meaning you can look at somebody and you can't tell if they have Legionnaires or COVID. I mean, they both can present very similar.
The same.
Yeah.
Kind of, and that's, has there been any, probably not, but any confirmed cases that could be attributed to THC?
There's a handful of case reports, and those have been published in the scientific literature. I've read through those from late 90s, early 2000s. So, and then they went on and did some animal studies in mice to understand that mechanism of exactly what was going on. But that information has really not been put out there. And
I'm going to say nobody knows about that.
There's too much money to be earned in cannabis production and operations and taxes to be coming from it. So, I don't expect that to be on the, above the fold anytime soon.
That's honestly, that is absolutely crazy. But I want to jump on to kind of water management strategies, not just, especially in our veteran-led facilities. Do you think there's been any changes? Or let's talk about what water management strategies did they have up until the modern day? Since the outbreak in 1976, what did they do?
Well, I tell you, the first 40 plus years, from 1976, or I'll say 77, because it wasn't until early 77 that we really understood what was going on. It has been a progression of, it's there too. Oh, it's there too. Initially, they only thought it was cooling towers, and then they said, well, okay, now it's also hot water. It can be in these plumbing systems. Oh, well, it can be in hot tubs too. Oh, well, that's news. Oh, it can be in drinking water. Oh, that's news. So it has been this progression of, this is where it is, don't worry about it. And for up until 2015, the CDC, if you would call them, and I've done this, you say, we want to examine this facility for Legionella and as a risk factor, and they would say, no, don't test.
It was crazy
until you have an outbreak. So until you are stacking up the bodies like cordwood, don't bother testing, because we don't know what it means. We don't know what to tell you to do. And then all of a sudden, they decide, after 10 years of debate, you should have these water management plans to tell people what to do. But in those, they still don't tell you need to test for the organism to understand it. It wasn't until 2021 that the words routine testing for Legionella was uttered by the CDC. So it has been an agonizingly slow process to get it out there. And I understand why. It's, there's a lot of fear. There isn't enough funding. I've called Legionnaire's disease and as a program of the public health to be the redheaded stepchild of the organization. It has gotten moved around. It gets little to no funding. It is a no one is welcome if Legionnaire's disease is being talked about. So it shouldn't surprise us. And ironically, the name Legionnaires and its association with veterans often makes me remember how it's a good American tradition that we've had for a long time to really forget, neglect, and move on from our veterans. Thank you for your service, but we're done with you now.
Absolutely. Do you know what? That's heartbreaking for me, for British veterans, for American veterans. As you know, I do a lot of support with American veterans as well, and it's heartbreaking to see because they are forgotten. And I think this is something where we kind of need to spearhead change, and hopefully, HC3 we can spearhead change. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Well,
What
let me tell
change
you
do you
one
think
thing.
needs to be seen? Huh?
Let me tell you one thing that has really bugged me, and most people probably have not run into this. So, in talking with some of my colleagues on the public health side, I was talking with someone at a state health department, and asking them about the Legionnaire's disease rates, and we had an outbreak in that community, and they said, "Oh no, this is political correctness gone haywire." He said, "We're really not wanting to call this Legionnaire's disease anymore." I said, "What are you talking about? Why?" Well, it's pejorative. It's we don't want to hurt the feelings of the veterans and the Legionnaires of this. And I kind of laughed. And I said, well, I don't think you're naming it after them is bad at all. It keeps keeps the name in the forefront of people's minds when they hear it. But they've experienced worse than having a disease named after them.
You know what I mean? I think changing the name of it would also be a danger to the veterans, because at least the veterans are already forgotten in a lot of the cases and anything that we see. I mean, I see veterans that are begging on the street and are homeless, and it's just it's crazy. I mean, that's another thing to talk about. But it begs the question: why change it? Because they're always burying their head in the sand anyway. So let's keep it focused.
Yeah. Don't worry about my feelings. Let's help me with my health.
What do you think then? Let's talk about the changes that need to be made. And I know we can talk about changes generally for a wider community, but let's in particular talk. What changes do the military and the government need to take to protect not only our veterans but even our serving soldiers?
The VA actually has a policy in line. The GSA actually has just initiated some testing at all government-owned facilities. It's resources. Treat this seriously. Stop, putting a program in place. That's as bad as the Congress saying we're going to commission a study. That's the death knell of anything. But having a plan, having an investigation, put money towards it, and part of that is going to be true monitoring of your water quality, monitoring and fixing of the water delivery and treatment systems in a community.
Yeah.
And, because water systems are underground for the most part, they're underground, they are in the walls, they're in the mechanical rooms. You don't see how bad they are. And if most people saw
to that.
how horrible pipes and holding tanks looked, they would never open a tap and drink that water.
It's frightening, to be honest, when you think about it. Yeah.
But there are policies in place by the VA. There are administrative requirements. There are ongoing testing, and it is as minimal as they can do.
So let's talk about that, because obviously I still believe they're burying their head in the sand, and I think we need to hopefully HC3 we can spearhead for change, but. How often would you say then, at a minimal level, should a VA organisation, hospital, clinic, whatever, and even broadly over all communities, how often should we be testing that water?
Well, it's all types of water systems, but typically beginning with quarterly testing is an important part. And a robust test, not one or two tests, or test just the hot water or just the cooling towers. There's often a hyper focus on we're going to test every cooling tower. Well, that's a good start, but I can point to 40 other water sources that are just as at risk. But typically, at least 4 times a year is a good starting point, and you're going to probably detect a problem if you're going to see it at that point. But another part of it is changing and fixing and updating our safe drinking water levels. The fact is, municipal water systems do not test for, nor are they required to control and prevent Legionella transmission through the drinking water systems. And that drinking water is used to fill your cooling towers. That is, drinking water is used to fill your water heaters and your hot tubs and your misters and your decorative fountains. And there they go from, low, barely detectable concentrations to high concentrations that can cause disease and death. So, they're not without a part in this place. And as of today, they don't have to deliver levels of chlorine that will control the organism, and they don't have to test for or even control the organism by current statutes and requirements.
David, how I want to talk a little bit about the awareness, because we've kind of covered a lot. And before we finish off here for a moment, it's there's obviously a lack of awareness out there. What can we do, and what should we be doing to increase the awareness, especially for our veteran facilities?
I think it really needs to go back to the policymakers, the Congress and the representatives, not just take care of this when you have an outbreak, not just take care of this when it hits the front page of the press and the media's out front and everybody's running around like a fire drill, but to take this seriously and to hold people accountable. One of the fundamental things that I've seen is the individuals and the entities that are held responsible don't have the authority to fix it.
Oh yeah, of course, that's the big thing. And
those with the authority aren't being held responsible. So until you say, hey, CEO or CFO or head of medical direction facilities, you are both responsible, and here is the authority. And authority comes in the form of cash, the ability to spend money to assess the problem, fix the problem, and keep the problem from coming back. If you don't have the budgetary authority to do that, but they have the responsibility to fix it, that usually ends up in don't test, don't look, don't tell me, I don't want to know.
Do you think, you're talking about the financial implications, David, do you think that in reality, with the quarterly testing that you're talking about, would put much of a constraint on budgets, really, in terms of it's only a quarterly testing?
Well, what happens when you're a hospital facility and you have 300 buildings? Each one is its own little ecosystem. So that that can be very expensive. And then you're going to send it to a certified, qualified, competent laboratory. And you're going to have somebody who's not the person or the company responsible for maintaining it, but an outside source, so that people aren't, taking samples at the ideal time or taking samples from a Dasani water bottle and sending those in. So there's a lot of fear out there in I don't want to bring bad news, but it is expensive, or maybe, having some way of, if you spend these monies on this program, then it's somehow brought back to the organization in grants or tax incentives or something. There's many ways that government organizations can do that, but right now there's nobody's budgeting for this, and nobody's budgeting for the issues. I will say that I think a larger number of buildings out there are at risk of Legionnaires disease and growing Legionella in their water systems than what we had thought before. But right now, there's been no large study to look at what's the percentage of buildings and communities that are at risk of Legionnaires disease. We're pretty much whistling past the graveyard.
I also think as well with the certainly in the veteran community, in the military community, I have never in my yes, we have the environmental health departments, we had them in the medical corps as well. Actually, I was part of that at one point as well, which is weird how we ended up working together. But it seems to me that there was nobody, and certainly in the British military, and I haven't seen anybody in the American military that is responsible for the water. There doesn't seem to be anybody who's trained in water management. It just seems to be, we've got the water, and hey ho, we've got water, it's safe.
Well, when it's warfighters, when you're in a community of warfighters and you're deployed, often that's the engineers, either the Corps of Engineers or the Seabees if you're in the Navy or Marines, and the engineers in the Army, and that type of water, frankly, it's more at risk for other types of pathogens than Legionella. Because how many hot showers did you get to take when you're deployed?
None.
None. Yeah. Yeah. I got a few fire hoses at times, but yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
it wasn't, not hanging out in the hot tub either. But
No chance. Absolutely no chance.
yeah, in modern times, in modern deployments, we're often dealing with contractors, facility organizations that are, contracted to maintain the base operations and ensure water quality. And what are their requirements? I can tell you, Legionella hadn't been a major one for them.
Well, no, I mean it's not been something that's been brought up to their awareness, to be honest, and that comes back to the whole reason that why we need more awareness out there about this fact.
Yeah, if it's
Because
in the contract, it'll get done. That's one of the things.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah. It's not what's expected; it's what's inspected that's going to get done.
David, I want to just final thoughts. I think this has been a great conversation, and I hope that people, especially those of us who love our veterans and who will take this episode and make it serious. What is it that you hope for the future for our veterans?
Well, I definitely want greater awareness of the risks that they've taken in the past and how those risks and injuries that they brought with them from the battlefield back home make them more susceptible moving forward, not just at the hospital, not just at the retirement home, but in their communities and in their homes and in their hotels and hospitals and all types of environments. Having a veterans memorial park is great, but when it's literally has a fountain in the middle of it that's harboring bacteria that could kill them, that seems like rather insulting. So making it a more holistic recognition of veterans sacrifices as well as their risks moving forward, and to do something about it. It's not just a matter of giving lip service and saying we'll take care of it once we have an outbreak, but take care of it beforehand.
Yeah, there's a gift in being proactive.
Yeah, and I think the next thing is really to fund the research necessary to truly understand what's happening and why Legionnaire's disease has been on such a great increase since 2003, over 650% increase. No additional funds have really been put towards this. And what technologies can we use to prevent this without creating other problems? Right now, the main technologies we use are adding chemicals into our drinking water, which poses a risk by itself, causes damage, and knowingly puts carcinogenic byproducts into our drinking water. We have to find a better way. And I think those are some of the things we need to start looking forward, not just for Legionnaire's disease, but other waterborne pathogens that we know are costing lives and costing money and making people ill. We can do better. We just need to pay attention.
Absolutely. David, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I think it's great, again, from two veterans who have a passion for the veteran community. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening out there, if you've got any concerns or you want to know more, then please contact us. Contact David at hc3fl.com. And if you are a veteran organization and you're confused and you need some guidance, then please reach out to us at hc3fl.com as well. And any questions you have will be forwarded to David and the team at HC3 to answer that. Thank you again, David, for joining me. I'm looking forward to the next conversation that we have. And everybody out there, take care and God bless.